Edwin then left us and retired into another room. I had hardly been chatting with Ruth for a moment about our new occupation, when my old friend returned, bringing with him a very striking-looking man, who I knew at once had come from a higher sphere in answer to Edwin's call. He did not appear to be one of our own countrymen, and my observation was correct, since he was an Egyptian, as Edwin told us later on. He spoke our own tongue perfectly. Edwin introduced us and explained my wishes and the possible difficulties of their fulfillment. Our visitor was possessed of a very strong personality, and he gave one the strong impression of calmness and placidity. He would, one imagined, always remain perfectly unruffled. We all seated ourselves comfortably, and Edwin acquainted him with the extent of my knowledge concerning communication with the earth world. The Egyptian placed some considerations before me. If, said our visitor, I was fully determined that by returning to the earth plane to speak, I should retrieve the situation that was given me cause to regret, then he would do everything to assist me to achieve my purpose. It would not be possible to do what I wanted, though, for some years to come. But in the meantime, I was to accept his definite assurance that I should eventually be able to communicate, and he made me a promise to that effect. If I would have patience, all should be as I wished. I was to leave the whole matter in the hands of those who had the ordering of these things, and all would be well. The time, to use an earthly term, would soon pass, and the occurrence of certain events, meanwhile, would make the path clear and would provide the requisite opportunity. It must be remembered that what I was asking was not merely to return to the earth plane to endeavor to record the fact that I still lived. What I wanted was to try to undo something that I wished I had never done, and it was a task I could see that could not be accomplished in a moment. What I had written I could never unwrite, but I could ease my mind by telling the truth as I now know it to those who were still on the earth plane. The kindly Egyptian then rose and we shook hands. He congratulated us on the way we had accustomed ourselves to our new conditions of life, wished us joy in our new work wherever we should start, and finally gave me a repeated promise that my own particular wishes should have their certain fulfillment. I tried to express my gratitude for all his help, but he would not hear of it, and with a wave of the hand he was gone. We remained for a while discussing our plans. I was looking forward keenly to starting our work. It must not be thought that we were part of a campaign to convert people in the religious sense of which that word is used on earth. Far from it. We do not interfere with people's beliefs nor their viewpoints. We only give our services when they are asked for in such matters, or when we see that by giving them we can effect some useful purpose. Neither do we spend our time walking about evangelizing people, but when the call comes for help we answer it instantly. But there comes a time when spiritual unrest will make itself felt, and that is the turning point in the life of many a soul who has been confined and restricted by wrong views, whether religious or otherwise. Religion is not responsible for all mistaken ideas. There are a surprising number of people who do not realize they have passed from the earth in the death of the physical body. Resolutely, they will not believe that they are what the earth calls dead. They are dimly aware that some sort of change has taken place, but what that change is, they are not prepared to say. Some, after a little explanation and even demonstration, can grasp what has actually happened. Others are stubborn and will be convinced only after prolonged reasoning. In the latter case, we are oftentimes obliged to leave such a soul for a while, to allow a little quiet contemplation to work its way. We know we shall be sought out the instant that soul feels the power of our reasoning. In many respects, it is tiring work, though I use the word tiring in its strictly limited sense of the spirit world. Ruth and I both were both more than grateful to Edwin for his generous help in our affairs, and I was particularly so, both to him and the Egyptian, for the excellent prospect of communicating with the earth world. In view of our decisions to cooperate with Edwin in his work, he made the suggestion that as we had seen a little, but only a very little, of our own realm, we might now profitably make a visit to the dark realms. Ruth and I both concurred, adding that we had by now sufficient self-confidence to withstand anything of an unpleasant nature that might be before us. We should, of course, be under the immediate protection and guidance of our old friend. Needless to say that without this we should not have attempted to go, even had we been permitted. We left Edwin's beautiful house, quickly traversed our own realm, and again we were on the borders of the lower realms. Edwin warned us that we should feel that sense of chilling which we experienced before, but that by an effort of will we could throw it off. He placed himself in the middle of us, Ruth and I, each taking one of his arms. He turned and looked at us, and was apparently satisfied with what he saw. I glanced at Ruth, and I noticed that her robe, as had Edwin's, had taken on a dull color, approaching almost gray. Looking at myself, I discovered that my own dress had undergone a similar change. This was certainly perplexing, but our friend explained that this toning down of our natural colors was but the operation of a natural law, and did not mean that we had lost what we had already gained. The practical application of such a law meant that we should not be conspicuous in uncongenial surroundings, nor should we carry the light of our realm into those dark places to blind the vision of those who dwelt there. We were walking along a great tract of barren country. The ground was hard underfoot, the green of trees and grass was gone, the sky was dull and leaden, and the temperature had dropped very considerably. But we felt an internal warmth that counteracted it. Before us we could see nothing but a great bank of mist that gathered in density as we advanced, until finally we were within it. It swirled round in heavy damp clouds, and it seemed almost like a dead weight as it pressed upon us. Suddenly a figure loomed out of the mist and came toward us. He was the first person we had met as yet, and recognizing Edwin, he gave him a friendly greeting. Edwin introduced us and told him of our intentions. He said he would like to join us, as perhaps he could be of some help to us, and we readily accepted his kind offer. We resumed our journey, and after a further passage through the mist, we found that it began to clear a little, until it vanished altogether. We could now see our surroundings clearly. The landscape was bleak in its extreme, with here and there a dwelling house of the meanest order. We came closer to one of the latter, and we were able to examine it better. It was a small, squat house, squarely built, devoid of ornament, and looking altogether thoroughly uninviting. It even had a sinister look in spite of its plainness, and it seemed to repel us from it the nearer we approached it. There was no sign of life to be seen at any of the windows or around about it. There was no garden attached to it. It just stood out by itself, solitary and forlorn. Edwin and our new friend evidently knew both the house and its inmate quite well, for upon going up to the front door, Edwin gave a knock upon it, and without waiting for an answer, opened it, and walked in, beckoning us to follow. We did so, and found ourselves in the poorest sort of apology for a house. There was little furniture, and that of the meanest, and at first sight to earthly eyes one would have said that poverty reigned here, and one would have felt the natural sympathy and urge to offer what help one could. But to our spirit eyes the poverty was of the soul, the meanness was of the spirit, and although it roused our sympathy, it was sympathy of another kind, of which material help is of no avail. The coldness seemed almost greater within than without, and we were told that it came from the owner of the home himself. We passed into a back room and met the sole occupant seated in a chair. He made no attempt to rise or give any sign of welcome. Ruth and I remained in the background, while the other two went forward to speak to our unwilling host. He was a man just past middle years. He had something of an air of faded prosperity, and the clothes he wore had been obviously neglected, whether through indifference or other causes. In the light of my earthly recollections, I was unable to say. He rather scowled at the two of us as Edwin brought us forward as new visitors. It was a moment or two before he spoke, and then he railed at us rather incoherently. But we were able to gather that he deemed himself to be suffering under an injustice. Edwin told him in plain terms that he was talking nonsense, because injustice does not exist in the spirit world. A heated argument followed, heated, that is to say, on the part of our host, for Edwin was calm and collected, and in truth wonderfully kind. Many times did the former glance at Ruth, whose gentle face seemed to brighten the whole dingy place. I too looked at Ruth, who held my arm, to see how this strange man was affecting her, but she was unperturbed.